People who realize too late they weren't alone. You know that feeling when you're home alone at night and you hear a sound that makes your blood run cold? That moment when your brain tries to rationalize it. It's just the house settling, it's the wind, it's nothing. But deep down, something primal inside you whispers, you're not alone. Now imagine that feeling. But you're right. What if I told you that some people lived with that terror for days, weeks, even months before discovering the horrifying truth? That while they slept, ate, showered, and went about their daily lives, someone, or something, was watching, waiting, breathing the same air. Tonight, I'm going to tell you about people who discovered far too late that they were never alone to begin with. My name is Nick, and I spend way too much thinking about people who realized too late they weren't alone. If this video helps you, or terrifies you enough to check your closets tonight, hit that subscribe button and leave a like. Because here's the thing, what I'm about to tell you isn't fiction. This isn't some creepypasta or urban legend. This is a real story about a real person who lived through every person's worst nightmare. And the truly terrifying part? Could happen to anyone. Look, we all like to think we'd know if someone was in our house, right? We'd hear them, sense them, feel their presence. That's what our instincts are for. That ancient part of our brain that kept our ancestors alive when predators lurked in the darkness. But what happens when that person doesn't want to be found? What happens when they're patient? When they study your routines, learn your schedule, and move like a ghost through your life? Now you might be thinking, Nick, that's impossible. I definitely know. Would you? Let me introduce you to a woman named Tracy. Tracy was a 57-year-old widow living in Rock Hill, South Carolina. After her husband died, she'd been living alone for 8 months in their modest 2-story home on a quiet suburban street. The kind of neighborhood where people wave to each other, where kids ride bikes, where nothing bad is supposed to happen. Tracy was lonely, sure, but she was coping. She had her routines. Coffee at 6 a.m., work from 8 to 5, dinner while watching the evening news, bed by 10 p.m. Routine. Predictable. Safe. Or so she thought. It started small. You know how it always does. In September 2012, Tracy began noticing things. Little things that didn't quite add up. She'd come home from work and feel like something was different. Not wrong exactly. Just off. A chair positioned slightly differently than she remembered. A cabinet door she was certain she'd closed, now open. Food missing from the refrigerator, not much, just enough to notice. A spoon in the sink she didn't remember using. At first she did what we all do. She rationalized it. I'm getting older, she told herself. I'm just forgetting things. She blamed grief, stress, the fog of widowhood. Because the alternative, that someone was in her house, was too terrifying to consider. But here's what most people don't realize. When someone is living in your home without your knowledge, they're not stupid. They're not making obvious mistakes. They've chosen you specifically because you're vulnerable, because you're alone, because they've watched you long enough to know exactly how to remain invisible. Tracy's intruder knew her schedule down to the minute. By October, the incidents were getting harder to ignore. Tracy would wake up exhausted, feeling like she hadn't slept at all. She started having vivid, disturbing dreams, or what she thought were dreams. In them, she'd feel a presence in her room. Sometimes she'd wake up paralyzed, unable to move, sensing someone standing over her bed in the darkness. Sleep paralysis, she told herself. Stress dreams. But then came the sounds. It started as soft creaking at night. Footsteps in the hallway above her bedroom, except there was no second floor above her bedroom. That area was just attic space, filled with old boxes and Christmas decorations. No reason for sounds up there. One night in late October, around 2 a.m., Tracy woke to the unmistakable sound of her toilet flushing. She froze in her bed, her heart hammering so hard she could hear it in her ears. She lived alone. She was in her bed. So who had just used her bathroom? She lay there in the darkness for what felt like hours, too terrified to move, straining her ears for any other sound. Nothing. just the settling silence of a house at night. In the morning, she convinced herself she'd dreamed it. Or maybe she'd gotten up to use the bathroom herself and forgotten. Some kind of sleepwalking episode. Now, you might be thinking, Nick, why didn't she just call the police? Good question. And here's where the psychology gets really interesting. When something unexplainable is happening to you, there's a part of your brain that absolutely refuses to accept the most terrifying explanation. It's a defense mechanism. Because if you admit that someone might be living in your house, you have to admit that you're in danger, that you're not safe, that the sanctuary of your own home has been violated in the most intimate, invasive way possible. So you rationalize. You explain it away. You blame yourself, your memory, your mental state, your age, before you'll accept the horrifying truth. Tracy did what so many victims do. She questioned her own sanity before she questioned the evidence in front of her. But the universe has a way of forcing us to face the truth, whether we're ready or not. On November 2, 2012, Tracy's nephew, Theon Woods, came to visit. Theon was 29, worked in construction, and hadn't seen his aunt in a few weeks. He immediately noticed she looked exhausted, dark circles under her eyes, jumpy, distracted. "You okay, Aunt Tracy?" he asked. "I'm fine," she said, but her hands were shaking as she poured him coffee. "Just haven't been sleeping well." They were sitting in the kitchen when Theon heard it. A creak, directly above them. In the ceiling. Tracy's eyes went wide. "Did you hear that?" "Yeah," Theon said slowly, standing up. "You got animals in your attic?" I don't know. I've been hearing sounds at night, but I thought." Theon was already heading for the hallway. "Where's the attic access?" Tracy showed him the small door in the upstairs hallway ceiling. Theon pulled down the folding ladder, grabbed a flashlight from the garage and climbed up. What happened next changed everything. Theon's head disappeared into the dark attic space. Tracy stood at the bottom of the ladder, her heart pounding, waiting. 5 seconds passed. 10. 20. Then she heard it. "Oh my God." Theon's voice was barely a whisper, but Tracy heard the fear in it. "What?" she called up. "What is it?" "Aunt Tracy." His voice was shaking now. "Call the police. Right now. Don't come up here. Call the police." "Theon, what?" "Call the police." The terror in his voice made her blood run cold. She ran to the kitchen, hands shaking so badly she could barely dial 911. 911, what's your emergency?" "My nephew is in my attic and he says I need to call the police. I think someone might be in my house." When the Rock Hill police arrived at Tracy's home at 4:47 p.m., they found Theon Woods standing guard at the bottom of the attic ladder, pale and shaking. He refused to let his aunt anywhere near the opening. "Someone's been living up there," he told the officers. "Someone's been living in my aunt's attic." The first officer to go up was Sergeant Mike Hammond, a 15-year veteran. Years later, in an interview, he would say that in all his time on the force, nothing had prepared him for what he saw. The attic was partially finished, plywood flooring, some insulation, exposed beams. Dark, dusty. But in the far corner, someone had created a nest. A camping mattress, blankets, pillows, a battery-powered lantern. And here's where it gets really disturbing. Plastic bags filled with feces and urine, carefully tied and stacked along the wall. A small collection of food wrappers and empty water bottles. And scattered around the makeshift bed, photographs. Photographs of Tracy. Tracy sleeping. Tracy in her kitchen. Tracy in her bathroom. Tracy getting dressed. Dozens of them taken through vents and gaps in the ceiling over a period of weeks, maybe months. But the most chilling detail? The space was warm. The blankets were rumpled. A half-eaten sandwich sat on a paper plate. Someone had been here recently. And they were gone. The Rock Hill police immediately secured the scene and began a manhunt. They processed the attic like a crime scene, collecting DNA evidence, fingerprints, and those horrifying photographs. But here's what really makes your skin crawl. They found something else in that attic. A small heating vent that had been unscrewed and removed. It gave a direct view down into Tracy's bedroom. They calculated that someone could have been living in that attic for weeks, possibly even months. They would wait until Tracy left for work, then climb down and use her bathroom, eat her food, and move freely through her house. Then, before she came home, they'd retreat back into the attic. Like a ghost. A parasite. Feeding off her life while she slept below, completely unaware. The police interviewed Tracy for hours. She remembered everything with horrible new clarity. The missing food. The toilet flushing. The sounds at night. The feeling of being watched. Her instincts had been screaming at her the entire time. She just hadn't wanted to believe them. Now, I know what you're thinking. Who would do this? Who was living in her attic? And here's where the story takes an even darker turn. The DNA and fingerprints came back with a match. His name was Andrew Swafford. He was 32 years old and he had a criminal record, breaking and entering, trespassing, stalking. He'd been released from prison just 4 months before Tracy started noticing things in her house. But here's the connection that made investigators' blood run cold. Andrew Swafford had worked for a roofing company that had done repairs on Tracy's house 2 years earlier. While her husband was still alive, he'd been inside her home. Legally, he'd seen the layout. He'd been in the attic. And apparently he'd been obsessed with Tracy ever since. After her husband died, he'd been watching, waiting. And when he saw she was alone, vulnerable, grieving, that's when he made his move. Police found evidence that he'd accessed the attic through an external vent on the side of the house that was hidden by overgrown bushes. He could come and go without ever being seen. The manhunt intensified. Every officer in Rock Hill was looking for Andrew Swafford. For 3 days, Tracy couldn't stay in her house. She stayed with her nephew, jumping at every sound, barely sleeping. The police had changed her locks, but what good are locks when someone had been living inside your walls? On November 5th, they got a break. A gas station attendant about 30 miles outside Rock Hill reported seeing a man matching Swafford's description purchasing supplies, food, water, batteries. The attendant had seen the news coverage and something about the man made him uneasy. Police arrived within minutes, but Swafford was already gone. They found his car abandoned in a wooded area nearby. Tracking dogs picked up his scent leading into the forest. Now here's where it gets truly terrifying. The K9 unit tracked Swafford for 2 miles through dense South Carolina woodland. The trail led them to an abandoned hunting cabin that hadn't been used in years. When police surrounded the structure and called for Swafford to come out, there was no response. They entered with weapons drawn. The cabin was empty, or so they thought. It was Officer Sarah Chin who noticed the ceiling panel was slightly askew. She'd read the reports about Tracy's attic. A chill ran down her spine. "He's in the ceiling," she whispered. They trained their weapons on the attic space. "Andrew Swafford, we know you're up there. Come down with your hands visible." Silence. Then a creak. Movement. But instead of coming down, they heard him moving away, scrambling across the ceiling beams like a rat in the walls. The panel crashed open on the far side of the cabin and Swafford dropped down, trying to run. He was tackled within 10 feet. In the interrogation room, Andrew Swafford sat with his head down, refusing to make eye contact. Detective James Warren had interviewed hundreds of criminals, but something about Swafford unsettled him. "Why Tracy?" the detective asked. "Why her house?" Swafford smiled. It was not a pleasant smile. "She was alone," he said simply. "I could tell she was lonely. After her husband died, I watched her for weeks. I watched how she moved through that house like a ghost herself, just going through the motions. I knew I could be there and she wouldn't even know. I could be close to her. You terrorized her." "I protected her," Swafford said, and there was genuine conviction in his voice. "I was there every night, watching over her while she slept. I took care of things. There was a spider in her bedroom once, a big one, I killed it and threw it away before she could see it. I was taking care of her. The detective felt sick. You were stalking her. You took pictures of her while she slept. I wanted to remember, Swafford said. I wanted proof that we'd had time together, that we'd shared something. You shared nothing. She didn't even know you were there. Swafford looked up for the first time and his eyes were cold. That's what made it perfect. Now here's what most people don't realize about cases like this, and this is where it gets really interesting. Andrew Swafford wasn't unique. He wasn't some one-in-a-million monster. Incidents of people secretly living in others' homes have been documented throughout history. In Japan, there's even a term for it, Yanura or attic dweller. In 2008, a 58-year-old Japanese woman was found living in a man's closet for over a year. She would come out when he was at work or asleep, shower, eat his food, and return to her hiding spot. In New York, 2013, a homeless man lived inside the ventilation system of a grocery store for nearly a year before being discovered. In Las Vegas, 2017, a woman reported hearing sounds in her attic for months. Police found a man living up there who had tapped into her electrical system to power a small TV and heater. The thing is, our homes are bigger than we think. More complex. Full of spaces we never really look at. Attics, crawl spaces, basements, utility areas. And if someone is patient enough, careful enough, and studies your routine meticulously enough, they can live alongside you for a very, very long time. Tracy never lived in that house again. She couldn't. Even after Swafford was arrested, even after the house was thoroughly searched and secured, she couldn't shake the feeling. Every creak was his footsteps. Every shadow was his presence. The sanctuary of her home had been irreversibly violated. She moved in with her nephew temporarily, then eventually relocated to a different state entirely. She sold the house at a significant loss. She couldn't bear to go back to PAC, so her family did it for her. In interviews with police psychologists, Tracy described the profound betrayal she felt. Not just by Swafford, but by her own senses. She'd heard him, sensed him, known something was wrong. But she'd convinced herself she was being paranoid, that she was losing her mind. I'll never trust my own instincts again, she said, because they were right and I ignored them. This is the real terror of what happened to Tracy. It wasn't just the physical invasion of her space, it was the psychological violation. The knowledge that for weeks, perhaps months, she had been performing her most intimate, vulnerable moments for an audience of one. Sleeping, changing, showering, crying, grieving, all of it observed by cold eyes in the darkness above her. Andrew Swafford was charged with stalking, burglary, trespassing, and invasion of privacy. The prosecutor pushed for the maximum sentence, arguing that Swafford's actions represented a particularly heinous form of psychological torture. During the trial, more disturbing details emerged. Analysis of Swafford's laptop, found in his abandoned car, revealed that he had been planning this for over a year. He had hundreds of surveillance photos of Tracy, some dating back to when her husband was still alive. He had documents detailing her routine, her habits, even her menstrual cycle, which he deduced from items in her bathroom trash. He'd been obsessed with the idea of living alongside someone without their knowledge. Tracy wasn't his first victim, just his most successful case. Police found evidence that he'd attempted similar intrusions into 3 other homes, but had been discovered too quickly. The defense attorney tried to argue diminished capacity, suggesting Swafford suffered from severe mental illness. Psychiatric evaluation revealed he had delusional disorder with erotomanic features. He genuinely believed he had a relationship with Tracy, that they were connected, that he was fulfilling some kind of romantic destiny by being near her. The jury deliberated for less than 3 hours. Guilty on all counts. Swafford was sentenced to 15 years in prison, with a requirement that he register as a sex offender upon release and be prohibited from living within 1,000 feet of Tracy for the rest of his life. As he was led from the courtroom, He turned and looked directly at Tracy, who had attended every day of the trial despite her terror. He mouthed 2 words, "Thank you." Tracy broke down sobbing. The case made national news and sparked a conversation about home security that went beyond simple locks and alarms. Home security experts began recommending that people, especially those living alone, regularly check spaces they don't normally access. Attics, crawl spaces, basements, large closets. Not once a year when you're looking for Christmas decorations, but monthly. Look for signs of disturbance. Dust patterns that have been disrupted. Items moved. Insulation compressed in places it shouldn't be. And yes, actual nests of bedding, food, or waste. But here's what really disturbs me about this case. How many Andrew Swaffords are out there right now? How many people are lying in bed tonight in homes they believe are empty, while someone breathes quietly in the darkness above them? How many unexplained sounds, missing items, or strange feelings are being rationalized away right this second? After Tracy's story went public, dozens of people came forward with similar experiences. A college student in Ohio discovered a homeless man had been living in her off-campus apartment's utility closet for 3 weeks. He'd rigged the lock so he could open it from inside, and he'd been surviving on her food, using her shower when she went to class. A family in Portland found evidence that someone had been living in their basement for over 6 months. The person had created a living space behind stored furniture and had apparently been coming and going through a bulkhead door the family never used. In each case, the victims reported the same progression. Small unexplained incidents, rationalization, escalating strangeness, and finally, horrible discovery. And here's the truly chilling part. For every case that's discovered, how many go undetected? How many Andrew Swaffords successfully remain hidden, watching, waiting, living parasitically off others until they decide to move on to a new victim? Psychologists who study home invasion and stalking have identified why these cases are so uniquely traumatic. Your home is supposed to be your sanctuary. It's the one place in the world where you can completely let your guard down. Where you can be vulnerable, naked, asleep, undefended. It's the space where you keep your most valuable possessions and your most intimate moments. When that sanctuary is violated, especially in such a sustained, secretive way, it damages your fundamental sense of safety in the world. Victims of stealth home invasions, as they've come to be known, suffer from PTSD at rates comparable to victims of violent home invasions, despite never having been physically harmed. The psychological violation is that severe. Dr. Sarah Martinez, a trauma psychologist who worked with Tracy, explained it this way: "It's not just that someone was in her home. It's that they watched her at her most vulnerable and she didn't know. Every private moment she thought she had, she didn't. Her reality was a lie, and that kind of betrayal of basic trust in your own perceptions causes deep psychological damage." So let me give you some practical information here, because this isn't just entertainment. This is real and it could happen to you. Signs that someone might be secretly accessing your home. Food disappearing, especially items that don't spoil quickly. Small amounts that you might attribute to forgetting, but it's consistent. Items moved or disturbed in storage areas you rarely access. Boxes shifted. Dust patterns disrupted. Cobwebs broken. Unexplained sounds, especially at night or when you're in a different part of the house. Creaking. Footsteps. Water running. Doors closing. Feeling watched. Look, I know this sounds paranoid, but your instincts are millions of years old. If something feels wrong, investigate. Don't rationalize. Finding belongings you don't recognize. Clothing. Food wrappers. Cigarette butts. Anything that doesn't belong to you or anyone who should be in your home. Changes in utility bills. If someone is living in your home, they're using your electricity and water. Unexplained spikes could be a sign. Pets acting strangely. Dogs and cats have much better senses than we do. If your pet is fixated on a particular area of your home, especially ceiling or floor spaces, take it seriously. The question that haunted Tracy, and haunts everyone who hears this story, is simple but terrifying. How long was he really there? Because here's the thing. They only found evidence of him living there for a few weeks before the discovery. But Swafford had obsessed over Tracy for over a year. He'd worked on her house 2 years before her husband died. Had he been accessing the attic even when her husband was alive? Had he watched them together? Was he there during her husband's final illness, listening to Tracy cry herself to sleep after visits to the hospital? When Tracy's husband died at home, had Swafford been in the attic during those final moments? Had he witnessed her grief in those first raw hours of widowhood? Tracy will never know. And not knowing might be the worst part. But there's one detail I've saved for last. One element of this story that I find more disturbing than anything else. Remember those photographs the police found in the attic? The ones Swafford had taken of Tracy through vents and ceiling gaps? They weren't all taken from above. Some of them, about a dozen, were taken from floor level. In her bedroom. While she slept. Which means at some point, probably multiple times, Andrew Swafford didn't stay in the attic. He climbed down. He entered her bedroom. He stood over her sleeping form in the darkness and photographed her. How close did he get? Did he touch her? Did she ever wake up in those moments, sensing a presence, only to see nothing and convince herself it was just a dream? The police asked Swafford about this during interrogation. He smiled that cold smile again. Sometimes, he said, I'd stand there for an hour, just watching her breathe. She looked so peaceful, so beautiful. Sometimes she'd have nightmares and I'd want to wake her up, comfort her. But I knew I couldn't. Not yet. Not yet, the detective asked. I was waiting for the right time, Swafford said. For her to be ready to know about us, to understand what we had. I thought maybe in a few more months I'd reveal myself. She'd be so lonely by then, so desperate for connection. She'd understand that I'd been taking care of her all along. The detective's report noted, subject shows no remorse, no understanding of wrongdoing, complete detachment from victim's humanity, genuinely believed he was engaged in a consensual relationship. Tracy's story ended with Swafford behind bars. But for her there was no real ending, no moment of closure, no return to normalcy. She moved across the country, but the trauma moved with her. Every new home has to be thoroughly checked before she can sleep in it. She has cameras in every room now. Ironically, she watches herself the way Swafford once watched her, making sure she's actually alone. She doesn't sleep well. She probably never will again. Because the most horrifying thing about what happened to Tracy isn't what Andrew Swafford did. It's what it revealed about the fragile illusion of safety we all live with every single day. We assume we'd know if someone was in our home. We assume our senses would alert us. We assume that the locks on our doors and the walls around us provide actual security. But Tracy had all of that. And for weeks, maybe months, someone lived inside her walls, breathed her air, watched her most intimate moments, and she had no idea. So tonight, when you're lying in bed in the darkness and you hear a creak above you or a sound in another room, and your brain rushes to rationalize it away, maybe don't. Maybe get up. Check. Investigate. Because the scariest stories aren't the ones about monsters or ghosts or demons. They're the ones about real people. About predators who understand that the best hiding place is right under your nose. About the violation of knowing that when you thought you were alone, you weren't. Look, I know this story is going to keep some of you up tonight. That's okay. That's good, actually. Because the people who realized too late they weren't alone, they're the ones who ignored their instincts, who talked themselves out of their fear, who prioritized rationality over that primal sense that something was wrong. Don't be Tracy. Something feels off, investigate. If you hear sounds you can't explain, don't just lie there and try to convince yourself it's nothing. Get up. Turn on the lights. Check your house. Check your attic, your basement, your crawl spaces. Better to feel foolish for 10 minutes than to end up as another story like this one. And remember, Tracy survived. She got out. She's rebuilding her life, even if it'll never be the same. But not everyone is that lucky. If you've made it this far, hit that subscribe button and leave a like. Share this story, because someone out there needs to hear it. Someone out there is lying in bed right now, hearing sounds they're trying to rationalize, and this story might save them. My name is Nick, and I spend way too much time thinking about people who realized too late they weren't alone. Don't be one of them. Stay safe out there. And maybe, just maybe, check your attic tonight.